Okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, congratulations, we made it to Mark chapter 2. Eventually, we might actually get to the end of Mark, and that will be a great blessing for us all, I'm sure. Let's read the passage and then let's have a talk about what's going on. Again, embracing our sort of let's not get overly theological and complicated approach to working through the Gospel of Mark. When he returned from Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home, and many were gathered together, so that there was no more room, not even at the door. And he was preaching the word to them, and they came, bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. And when they could not get near him because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him. And when they had made an opening, they let down the bed on which the paralytic lay. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some of the scribes were sitting there, questioning in their hearts, "Why does this man speak like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" And immediately Jesus, perceiving in his spirit that they thus questioned within themselves, said to them, "Why do you question these things in your hearts? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Rise, take up your bed and walk'? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic, "I say to you, rise, pick up your bed, and go home." And he rose and immediately picked up his bed and went out before them all, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We never saw anything like this." Now, this is a well-known event in the Bible. It occupies a lot of column inches. Many people have written very large amounts of material on it. And so, as usual, I am not going to touch on every single point that could be touched upon here. I guess there are a few major themes that I just wanted to touch upon and draw out for the purposes of this section. The first thing you will probably have heard about here is a certain amount of speculation about why did Jesus forgive this person's sins? And from that, we tend to embark on a long discussion about maybe he had had a sinful past and that was why he was a paralytic, or maybe there was some sort of sin or generational curse or some sort of thing, depending on what language you use in relation to that particular thing, that needed to be dealt with before the man could be well. That is an interesting discussion to have, but for my part, it's a little too far into the realms of speculation, and I think for the purposes of how we're going to read Mark, it misses the point a bit. Because the text doesn't really deal with anything, and from where I sort of read it, the text does really explain why Jesus first forgave the paralytic's sins. I'm going to come to that in a minute. The next thing we tend to touch upon, and I'm not going to touch upon, is the faith of the friends. And faith is a big topic, and it comes up a lot in relation in particular to healing and physical illness. And we talk about faith of the person who has the illness and faith of those who are praying for that person, and many other conversations. And it does, to be fair, comment that Jesus saw their faith. What's interesting about that, though, is that in response to seeing their faith, he said, "Son, your sins are forgiven." It wasn't actually that he saw their faith and that was when he healed the paralytic man. So there's an interesting thought for you to ponder upon, but I am not going to ponder on that particular topic any further than what I just said, because, again, I don't think it's the key point of the passage, and we're looking to draw out the key points of the passage. There is an interesting little thing here. I don't know whether you've ever had to get on a piece of public transport or a bus or a train or something where there's someone on a very, very crowded bus or train and they've insisted on putting their bags on the seat next to them. It is funny that we read that this is this jam-packed area and there is absolutely standing room only. But when we get to the reference to the scribes, it says, "Now some of the scribes were sitting there." So just before, we've got there was no more room, not even at the door, but we've got some scribes sitting down somewhere, and simple logic says if you're sitting down somewhere, you're going to take up more room than perhaps would be useful in a very, very crowded space. That, again, a little speculative. Maybe everyone was sitting down, but it does make a point of telling us the scribes were sitting there, so that's just an interesting piece of imagery for you to consider about the scribes and their attitude to all the various people who were around them at that particular time. Two main things I did want to say. I've given you a list of things I don't really want to talk about, but here are the things I think it is worthwhile talking about. Thing number one, this passage, once again, is about authority. I've already spoken about the previous passages that are about authority. We've seen that Mark, having dealt with the prophecy to establish Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of God, and having shown him calling some of his first disciples and their reactions to that, we immediately then go into a section to establish Jesus' authority over various things. And we have seen that he has authority over evil spirits. We have seen that he has authority over illness. We have seen that he has authority to cleanse people, in this case of leprosy. And we had a discussion about how the word there was cleansing, not healing, and the various differentiation we need to make between those things. Connected, but different terminology, and certainly with a different underlying premise beneath them. And here we get to another area of authority, and in a sense it is a critical area of authority because it underpins the entire purpose for which Jesus has come. And this is why Mark starts now embark on it, and that is authority over sin. And it says it very, very straightforward. But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. And then he goes and he heals the paralytic. This passage is designed to affirm Jesus' authority over sin. At its absolute core, we need to know that Christ has authority over sin. Because if he doesn't, then that's going to create an enormous problem for us when it comes to where we put our faith and what we think Jesus achieved through his death and resurrection. So, Mark needs to establish, and here he is starting to establish, the relationship Jesus had when it comes to sin. Step one, to establish that Jesus has authority over sin. And we're going to see as we continue on that we're about to call Levi, and we're about to start having dinner with tax collectors and sinners. And so we're embarking now on a little segue into the area of sin and how Jesus responds to sin. And in particular for this passage, his lordship over sin. So this is what this passage is designed to do. And I think that also, so far as the text is concerned, without embarking on too much extracurricular activity, the text itself tells us that that is why Jesus healed the man's sins first. He did it so that he could then demonstrate through a connected display of power by healing the paralytic man, that if he can do that, then they needed to start contemplating in their own minds, shifting their understanding of who he was, bearing in mind he calls himself the Son of Man, a controversial topic we'll come back to another time, that he was someone who had the authority on earth to forgive sins. If I can do this, why are you going to find it so hard to believe that I can do that? That was the principal point that Jesus was making here. In my view, that is the simplest explanation for why he healed the man after forgiving his sins in that way. So, that I think is the big point of the particular passage in question. I'm sure there are many, many, many other things we could talk about with this passage, but just take away, Mark is layering up another level of authority, and in a sense we're getting to that really critical area of authority, which is Jesus Christ's authority over sin. Now, there's another little parallel we can draw here. I have discussed the nature of allegory and parable when it comes to reading historical events, and it's interesting here that what we have is a paralytic man, that he is unable to move his body. But if we want to go on that sort of adventure, we might have a look at the paralytic nature of the scribes and Pharisees. Who is it who's really unable to shift in this scenario? We have a situation at the start where one man is paralyzed in body, but not necessarily in spirit. Jesus forgives his sin, heals his body, and he is free to go. His sins have been forgiven. His body has been sealed. He is healed. He is now able to get up and walk and leave. But on the other hand, we have the scribes who were questioning the things in their heart about whether it's blasphemy and who is this man to claim this sort of authority. And at the end, they remain exactly in the same position as they had been at the start. There is no movement there. In a sense, if we wanted to go in this direction, we could say that they were the true paralytics of this story. They did not receive the restoration because they refused to see what was unfolding before their very eyes. Those are really the main points I wanted to draw out of this passage. We are embarking now on chapter 2. We're about to call Levi. We're about to have some very interesting events unfold, and I hope you will hang around, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.